After, what has it been, like 8 episodes, we're finally here. The 80% 1911 build is fully functional and looking sharp. As you'll see in the last section of this finale, not everything went smoothly between the assembly and trigger videos you saw last and now. But we'll leave the lessons learned section for the end. You've already seen the glamour shots, so I know what you're waiting for next. You want to see how it shoots. Well, don't let me stop you. Let's jump right into it.
Round 1, fight!
As per usual, at the end of a project, I like to talk about lessons learned, and there were definitely a lot of them learned on this build. The first and probably most egregious lesson I learned is why people don't generally Cerakote 1911s. A lot of people told me that at the beginning, that I probably shouldn't do it. Of course, I decided not to listen. But if you're going to Cerakote a 1911, or probably a 2011 falls into this category too, you probably shouldn't do it on your first build. You probably shouldn't do it on a high tolerance hand fit one. And if you are going to do it, you should probably use Elite Series because it's a heck of a ton thinner than H Series. I say this because Cerakote, as thin as it is, it's not zero thickness. If I add thickness to my frame in the form of Cerakote, and then I add thickness to my slide in the form of Cerakote, if each of those films of thickness is 1 thou, I now, in an area like this, have added 4 thousandths of an inch because I've got slide on the bottom, frame on the bottom, slide on the top, frame on the top. So you can see how even a very, very, very small amount of thickness can really quickly start to add up and undo a extremely toleranced build. For example, if you've got your slide and your frame to within 1/1000th of an inch and working beautifully, if you now put 4 thousandths of an inch of additional material, you're now tight by 3 thousandths of an inch. So again, probably not the smartest thing for me to do on my first 1911 build. It is what it is. The other reason why I say I probably wouldn't do it on my first 1911 build if I was doing this in hindsight is because, as you remember, I had my slide perfectly fitting my frame, and then obviously I added those thicknesses. I didn't have that perfect fit anymore. I had to put in a lot more effort to refit this slide to this frame than was probably normal for a build. You saw me really struggle with that. And the reason I bring that up is 2 reasons. One, I should have, in hindsight, just paid for the stones and stoned my rail area and done my fit and got it a lot closer before I started lapping. That's number 1. And number 2 is because I had to be so aggressive with it, I think I ended up doing a little damage to my finish. I talked about this a little bit, but I got that gridded lapping compound on parts as I was moving things, and you'll see Cerakote's not impervious to wear. If you look at your everyday carry weapon, it'll have wear on edges. Well, with the dozens upon dozens upon dozens of movements back and forth of the slide on the frame, and my hands and parts covered in abrasive lapping material, there are some spots where I wore through that very thin top coat, and you can see just the blue titanium base coat. You can also see that in a couple little areas around the edges here. You'll remember I was pushing with this, and you can actually see the darkness where the lapping compound's been embedded in the cork, which also has some abrasion to it. I was a little rougher on this through the process than if I had fit it better before lapping. And again, that was a problem because now I'm wearing my brand new Cerakote finish. It is not impervious to wear. The other lesson learned, and another reason why there's a ton of wear, is I have had this gun apart and reassembled in various stages of completion probably 100 times. And that's not an exaggeration. And that also is going to wear on a gun, especially up here where you're constantly using that aluminum tool to move your bushing and get things out of the way. And the reason for that is I had a absolutely massively frustrating time trying to diagnose a very particular problem. I was getting failure to eject under all circumstances every round. Naturally, the first thing I did was I went and made sure that I had a recoil spring rate appropriate for 9mm. I did. I then went and looked, did I have a mainspring housing spring with a rate appropriate for 9mm? And I learned something interesting. The spring pack that I bought comes with a correctly rated spring for recoil, but it comes with the same recoil spring for a 45. I don't know why they did that. Apparently that was original to the first 9mm 1911s, so they went with it. But I bought extra springs and I went down a few pounds to what most forums recommend. And even though now I have the appropriate combination, I was still getting failure to ejects. So I went on the forums and I pleaded for help. And everyone pointed me to there being a problem with my extractor. And you can imagine in order to get to the extractor, again, I'm taking things apart a lot, just like I was for the springs. I'm pulling things out. I have bent the extractor in. I've bent the extractor out. I've done that numerous times. Long story short, every single thing I did, it didn't make a damn bit of difference. And here's the lesson I want you to take away from that, because I did end up finding out what was wrong. Advice is great, but you're the one with the hands on the gun. You're the one that can feel around, experiment, etc. I should have gone and done that first before asking for the help, because what ended up being wrong is I had somehow, and I can't even replicate it, so I don't know how I did it, I had installed my sear, disconnector, and the associated pins in a wrong way, such that when I take the slide off and I press the disconnector, it would go down with a lot of force and it would not pop back up. My disconnector does not move freely in that hole. So there we're up, but if I push it, it's not only hard to push, but once it's down, it's staying down. No matter how the leaf spring was bent and giving it pressure, there was something binding it. And I took it apart, I put it back together, I retested it, now it works fine. But the way that I found that was twofold. After all the advice I'd gotten and the spring stuff didn't work, I took my camera, I set it on slow-mo, and I took a video of me firing it. And what I saw was elemental. The slide was not going back far enough for the casing to actually hit the ejector. Here's that same shot slowed way down so we can see exactly what's going on. So you'll see it fire, and the end of the slide is still about 1/4 to 1/2 inch out from the dust cover. Here's how far back it can go. So there's a big difference. And so of course, it's not going back far enough to actually have the case hit the ejector. Without a doubt, that is why it's not ejecting. So now my job was to figure out why is the slide not going back far enough. And that's when basically I took all the springs out and I would just sit I would get the hammer out of the way. I would sit here without springs in it and just feel for where I had ever so slightly more friction than elsewhere. Okay, so we've got no recoil spring in, the hammer is cocked, and let's look at this. Okay, it comes out of lockup very, very softly, very easy. There's a little bit of something right there that I can feel, but not a ton. And then it goes back very smoothly until it hits the hammer on that retaining plate back there. So let's pull that down. Okay, so we've got a little bit, okay, I probably shouldn't be looking at that. It obviously doesn't like me holding the hammer super cocked, but there's something right around here. Okay, that's the disconnector. There's some, yeah. So the disconnector, something is up with the disconnector. And what the answer ended up being is as I would move the slide back without the springs in, I would feel a slight bit more pressure right around there. And then it would ease up when the disconnector became visible through the breech. So I knew that the disconnector was somehow involved. I removed the slide, and that's where I found that it was hard to press down and that it would not return up. After I fixed that, everything worked fine. I haven't had a single problem since, and she's been shooting like a dream.
The other thing I learned is I need to reevaluate how I spray Cerakote on small parts. So for this build, there were a bunch of small parts, and I bought and used one of those like multi-alligator clip hangers. And what that did is it didn't really allow me to get in and treat each part independently how it needed to be treated. So as you'll see here in footage from a previous episode, I've got thickness problems out towards the edges. I guess Cerakote is one of the types of paint that runs towards edges. There's other types that run away from edges, but you'll see that I do have thickness problems at that edge. So either I need to paint these small parts individually one by one and then put them back on the hanger somehow, or I just need to learn how to use that hanger thing better, but something to note.
Finish him!